Hello, welcome back to part two of my interview with Juliet Sargeant. I'm Professor Carla Bluhm at the College of Coastal Georgia in Brunswick, Georgia in the United States. And I have the great fortune to have award-winning gardener Juliet Sargeant with me. We have a part one, so I encourage you to watch part one first if that is something you'd be interested in. And I'm going to launch into a question that kind of bounces off of part one. As we were talking about Juliet's award-winning anti-slavery garden, she was speaking about how the UK had taken the tragedy of the George Floyd killing as a way to inspire a new way, a new reawoken way to think about how to use gardening and voices and other movements within the UK. And as most people know, we in Brunswick, Georgia, had a very tragic killing of Ahmaud Arbery. And I wanted to ask Juliet if she didn't mind reflecting on a question, if she could speak about a little bit about Ahmaud Arbery killing, and maybe I think to form an idea for not just my students but all students everywhere about how a garden become a healing and reflective enterprise.
Well, over in the UK, we hear about these just horrific killings that you've had in the USA, and what we've come to realise in the UK is that it's very easy for us to sort of look across the water and think, oh, well, that doesn't happen over here. But we have been reminded, being forced to acknowledge that it does happen here as well. It's very difficult to talk about, and also I'm very aware that I'm talking to your community that have been so closely traumatized by this event. But what it's made me reflect on is thinking back to when I first started working on the modern slavery garden. I didn't actually know anything about modern slavery. Like many people, I was completely ignorant, really, of the fact that it existed and the fact that it was in every town in my hometown, up the road from me. And when I did my research and I started to realise this, I was very, very shocked, and I was angry, really angry, to realise that this was going on. And so my first sort of creative response was to create a concept for a garden, which was a very angry concept. It was very different from what we ended up with. Okay. So I started to think about people being treated as a commodity, shipped around the world as if they were, bags of sugar. And so I started with the idea of those big shipping containers. And what I wanted to do was literally tear them up. And in the garden, I was planning to have sort of rent pieces of metal, parts of shipping containers, and then, to symbolically sort of tear up this terrible process that goes on. And that was my initial response, anger, shock and anger. And very wisely, I think, the sponsors of the garden said to me that they didn't feel that that was the way to engage with our audience. Now, remembering that our audience was a flower show going audience. All they wanted to do was go to a show and see beautiful flowers. They didn't want to come and see sort of torn metal and anger. So I listened to them, which it's quite a difficult thing to do when you put your heart and soul into a creative enterprise, and then you're told to sort of about face do something really different. Yeah. So they asked me to do something that was more hopeful and that would engage with people. And so that experience makes me think about your students and the project to create a garden in Brunswick, or garden areas in Brunswick. And I think perhaps your initial response might be anger or hurt or trauma. You might want to create something angry. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong. Like, as I say, I see gardening as an art. There's nothing wrong with creating an artistic piece that expresses your emotions. But I think what it boils down to is, what is the purpose of your garden space? And if your garden space is solely about expressing, that's fine. But if you want to create a garden space which is about connecting with other people, starting a conversation, engaging with people who perhaps you don't know very well, reaching out across to other communities, then perhaps the angry route is not the right route. I pose the question, and that's something that each individual creator needs to think about. But for me, I felt in that instance that there was another way to engage people. And what I wanted to do, and perhaps what your students would think about, is these 4 things. I think if people are going to start a conversation, I think they need to feel safe. And of course, Brunswick, as we have seen, is not a safe place for everybody. So perhaps your garden spaces could really concentrate on creating a safe space for everybody. And then, as I mentioned before, I think for conversation, for learning, for change, people have to be moved emotionally. So I think to create a space that moves people is the next thing. And then once people are moved emotionally, then they engage their brains. Then they start to think. And that's the point at which you can have a conversation. You can talk about change. You can start to challenge some of their ideas because they feel safe. They feel engaged emotionally. You can actually start to challenge some of their beliefs. And then, if you have created this place of safety and conversation, you will find that other people are drawn into that space. And so it becomes a place of coming together. And what I would love to see is those spaces created around Brunswick. So I'm watching this space to see what you guys do.
Thank you. That's so inspirational. And I think that's what my hope is also, and hopefully for the students and other people that watch this conversation that we're having. And I love that idea of safety. You know, I had kind of woven this question that you just responded to so thoughtfully with something that was, I think, my own, I don't know, wondering. And I didn't know if it was too like revolutionary to think, you know, that as you know, and we all know that statues that are offensive for many ways are still around the South in particular, not only, but in the South, including one in Brunswick. So what is to become of the statue, you know, and I don't know anything currently right now, any plan or anything, but the tradition, as you know, is to tear it down and to throw it away. And that's one response, and that's not a wrong response. But I was wondering if this idea, do you think it's possible to almost leave a statue that's very hurtful to many, many people, but to kind of alongside to have one of these wonderful, safe, conversational and emotional gardens almost in conversation with a Confederate statue. Is that just something I'm dreaming up that might be a good idea? Or is that something that you think, or do you remove the statue? I mean, I'm just interested in how you kind of see.
I mean, in the UK, people are talking about moving the statues to museums,
Yes.
To be able to set up an exhibition around them to give a context. So yes. I think that's a very, I would call that sort of a head reaction, because that's taking it to an educational space and putting lots of information around,
like so plaques and signage and
So that's one way of doing it, sort of putting it in historical context and dealing with it on an intellectual level. Mm-hmm. But I think what you're talking about is trying to deal with it on an emotional level, by possibly creating a garden or doing something like it. And I think obviously I must say that I think, you know, these spaces and these statues belong to the people. So I do think it's a conversation that needs to be had with the community and not just imposed. I must say that. I think it is a creative opportunity, isn't it, to think about how these statues, and maybe it's not as simple as, you know, just putting a garden. Maybe, I don't know, maybe there's a possible reworking of the statue itself. Maybe. Yeah. I don't know.
That's so interesting to re-envision or reimagine how the statue could be modified, or I mean, you know, I'm not thinking it has to be like your container, you know, taking the actual container, and your idea is to just rip it apart so it cannot contain anything, but to re-envision the statue in a way that involves conversation, emotion, and engagement.
So to give them the option to actually do something with the statue itself, and create a space around.
So interesting.
And the conversation is, what, you know, why does the statue change?
So interesting.
Maybe.
So interesting. Well, yes, I hope that this little inkling, these little acorns of tiny sprouts of that thought that we have here, help people to rethink, just to have novel and reimagine what could be done through imaginative gardening, and taking a Juliet Sargeant heart and mind and creativity to a project. And I'm going to bring this to my students, and they're going to have to, for projects, to watch these tapes and to recreate spaces. And that's how we can begin this, I think, by people in educational settings having projects like this, and then taking them maybe into their own communities, whether they're churches or synagogues or community meetings or protests, and saying, let's do this. So it will be really exciting, and hopefully will help students and everybody to use gardening. So I have a couple questions from students about your garden. And as you know, during the summer I incorporated your an interview with you that was a video, and I asked them to through a discussion forum on our learning platform to share with one another their ideas, their inspiration, their memories of their own gardens, of their grandmother's gardens, of the, as you said in part one, their fears of gardening. And you know, it's funny, we have fears of gardening. I guess people have phobias about writing and painting and other creative platforms. So maybe your link about all of those as being blank slates, being really related. One of the questions from one of the students, I have two questions, is if there was any reason about the specific flowers you use. Were they symbolic to you? Were they, I don't know. I'll let you answer.
Yeah, well, no. Actually, the flowers don't have any meaning at all, but they were very, very important. I talked about before about the importance of engaging with people, and that the audience for the Chelsea Flower Show is a gardening audience. And I felt it was really important to create a beautiful garden for them. Because in the past, there have been exhibits at Chelsea which have been very modern, very cutting edge. You know, for example, there was one that was a pile of bricks one year. And that's fine. I have nothing against that kind of art.
Yes.
But I felt that in a gardening show, when people have paid a lot of money to go, I felt if I was going and had paid my ticket price, I might be a bit upset to see a pile of bricks if I was expecting to see flowers. So I felt, look, let's not get off on the wrong foot with our audience by giving them something that they're not expecting, something they don't want to watch. Let's give them a beautiful garden, and then they might talk to us.
I mean, not to interrupt, but it reminds me of your idea about that people want to feel, you need people to feel safe in spaces, and to have that, I mean, absolute brilliant, lush flower display was an invitation, like a bee almost, fly over here and land upon these flowers, and then you will open your eyes and see everything else.
Yeah, so that's invitation is the word. I didn't want it to be an in-your-face challenge, because I felt people would just turn and go somewhere else. I wanted it, come in, talk to us.
Yes.
And but the other thing I did was I deliberately asked for a plot that had 4 sides, because most of the plots are against a wall, so they only have 3 sides. And I wanted one that people could walk all the way around. And we had volunteers posted on all 4 sides, giving out leaflets and explaining the story of the garden. And then I thought, well, if people think that the planting is going to be the same on all 4 sides, then they won't bother to walk round. They'll just look at one side and then go off to the next in the show. So what I did was I changed the colours on the 4 sides of the garden. Went from blues and purples to oranges and burnt umbers and reds, and then round to apricots, and then round to pinks. And so people would sort of go around, oh, there's another colour. Oh, look, it's gone blue now. And just keep going round the garden, enjoying the different colours. And so in that way, I got them to spend more time at the garden, which gave us more opportunity to talk to them.
I love that so much. I love the intellectual level of just, the way humans function in garden settings, their expectations, but also your need really to have them engage with this really serious nature of the garden. It's sort of like giving a little, I read once for a class I was teaching about, that they always give a sweet with the bill, and like a little piece of chocolate to sweeten the sting of the money you're the money you're about to pay, a little sweet just to modify it. So almost just the fragrance. I mean, we have to really imagine walking through that space. And the impact of keep on moving through it. And the second question from the student was about the numbers on the doors in the garden, if they were meaningful or random.
Yes. So I mentioned before that the garden had layers of meaning, and that people could engage with as much or as little as they wanted to. And the doors are all about that. So the numbers actually represent statistics, modern slavery statistics. And off the top of my head, I can't remember them all, but 29 was the estimated 29 million people worldwide who are thought to be in captivity or indentured slavery. And then the 13 was 13,000 people who are estimated to be in slavery in the UK. And then there were other numbers around the doors. And then there were other details, like I mentioned before, the door handles. So we had, on the outside, the doors had handles
and knockers. They had knockers also, I think.
Whoa! Like your front door or my front door, because we go in and out freely. We get letters. We can communicate with the outside world. We can go out if we like. Whereas on the inside of the doors, it had no knocker, no handle, and no letterbox. And for me, that inside represented the captive space where people today are kept captive.
So I mean, that is not going to be missed on anybody who would have walked through your garden. The feeling of inside. As a psychologist, I'm so interested in, people's interior worlds and people's exterior worlds. And one of my students mentioned that she had had a difficult time in her life where she felt kind of trapped. And it really resonated with her, just that her inner world didn't match her outer door, her outer facade door either. And so I think it works at so many different levels for people, the garden you created. So I don't want to ever stop talking to you, but we probably should have some ending questions. And I'm really just curious what you want people to know about your current work, what's interesting you now, and maybe how to find you and information like that.
Yeah, well, I'm very, very excited. Hot off the press is the news that I've been engaged to create a garden for a church in London called the Holy Trinity Church, Clapham. And it's a very special church. It's about 250 years old. And the reason it's special to me, is that William Wilberforce, who we mentioned previously, who was the British politician responsible for the first anti-slavery bill back in 17 whatever, he worshipped at Holy Trinity Cathedral, and they are very keen to create a garden that recognises the church and their church community in history, the history of Britain, but also the history of the world, thinking about anti-slavery. But they also want to tell the story of their church being alive and kicking today. It's not just about the history, it's about their ongoing work. And they are engaged in lots of campaigning and social campaigns, etc. today. And so I'm busy designing a garden, which again is about telling stories. And as I always do with gardens, I start with my research, and I found that not only was William Wilberforce and his friends very active in the area of anti-slavery, but they were also great campaigners for general social reform, for prison reform, against animal cruelty, and against child labour, because remember this was 200 years ago. So they were busy campaigning in all these areas. And so around this garden, the church stands in its own grounds. So around this garden, we're going to have different areas that tell the different stories of the various campaigns of Wilberforce and his. They were called the Clapham set. So the Clapham set. So so this garden, it's going to take they're renovating the church as well. So the whole project will take a couple of years. But when it's all done in, I think 2023, something like that, I shall tell you all about it and perhaps show you some pictures of it.
Well, I will come visit you if you're willing to meet me on site and continue, assuming we all heal from the current, COVID crisis. But absolutely phenomenal idea, and so many conversations to be had in your new project. I just can't wait to hopefully come and see it and have you, if you would be willing to take me through, but I will certainly visit at some point.
And oak trees as well.
Yes.
Going back to the modern slavery garden, oak trees will be featured in the new garden at Holy Trinity Clapham as well. So.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm so excited. That's such a wonderful way.
Circularity.
Oh, I love it. And circularity also to our conversation. And I'm going to just thank you so much. And I know we can find your websites. We can find your gardening websites. We can find videos looking at the anti-slave garden. And I encourage everybody to do that as your way of deepening your knowledge of that phenomenal project. So Juliet, thank you so much. I looked forward to this conversation all summer, I have to tell you. So we'll say goodbye and definitely keep up with your work. And I will keep in touch personally about student projects and their thoughts just to let you know your impact.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I loved every minute. Okay, bye-bye. Bye-bye.